Pope John XII in the twilight years of the 9th century, when the eternal city of Rome still echoed with memories of ancient glory. A child was born who would cast a dark shadow over the holiest throne in Christendom. In the year 937, as autumn leaves fell upon the 7 hills of Rome, Octavianus entered the world, born into the powerful house of Tusculum. His father, Alberic II, ruled Rome with an iron grip. But even he could not have foreseen how his son would one day transform the sacred seat of St. Peter into a theater of scandal. Young Octavianus grew up in marble halls where power, not piety, was the currency of influence, while other noble children might have been schooled in scripture and sacred duties. He learned the art of pleasure and the ways of worldly excess. His father, determined that his legacy would continue, orchestrated what would become one of the most controversial successions in church history. As death approached, Alberic forced the Roman nobles to swear an extraordinary oath that upon the passing of the current pope, they would elect his son to the papacy. Thus, in the 955th year of our Lord, when Octavianus was barely 18 summers old, he ascended to the throne of St. Peter, taking the name John XII. A youth who had never shown interest in spiritual matters now held the highest religious office in the Christian world. The transformation of the Vatican that followed would have made even the most hardened Roman emperors of old blush with shame. The sacred palace, once filled with the whispered prayers of holy men, now echoed with the sounds of drunken revelry and forbidden pleasures. Where monks had walked in quiet contemplation, courtesans now danced through candlelit halls. The young pope turned the papal residence into something that witnesses described as more brothel than basilica. John's days were filled not with prayer and papal duties, but with hunting parties that thundered through the Roman countryside. His nights blazed with feasts that would have impressed Bacchus himself, where wine flowed like the Tiber and morality drowned in its depths. The sacred treasury, meant for the glory of God and aid of the poor, instead funded endless gambling and luxurious excess. Stories of his scandalous behavior spread through Christendom like wildfire. Witnesses spoke of sacred ceremonies interrupted by drunken outbursts, and holy sites defiled by acts that decent tongues dared not describe. He was said to have taken lovers from among noble ladies and holy sisters alike, turning sacred cloisters into scenes of his personal pleasure. The Pope, who should have been the shepherd of souls, had become a wolf among his flock. But John's failings were not limited to moral turpitude alone. His political judgment proved as corrupt as his personal life. In a desperate bid to secure his position, he crowned Otto I of Germany as Holy Roman Emperor in the 962nd year of our Lord. The ink had barely dried on the proclamation when John began plotting against his new ally, secretly negotiating with Otto's enemies. Otto, a skilled statesman and warrior, would not tolerate such betrayal. Within a year, his armies marched on Rome, and John fled like a thief in the night, taking with him precious treasures from the church's coffers. Otto convened a synod that laid bare the Pope's crimes. Murder, perjury, sacrilege, and sins that shocked even the most worldly of bishops. Yet even in exile, John proved dangerous. He returned to Rome with an army of supporters, driving out the Pope Otto had installed in his place. His revenge was swift and brutal. Those who had opposed him found themselves mutilated or executed, their suffering a testament to the depths of his cruelty. But fate, or perhaps divine justice, had other plans. In May of the 964th year, John's life came to an end as scandalous as his reign. Some chronicles claim he was caught in the act of adultery and struck down by an enraged husband. Others suggest he suffered a stroke in the midst of his sinful revelries. Still others whispered that demons had finally come to claim their due. The truth of his death remains as contested as his life. But one fact stands undisputed. The most sacred office in Christendom had been held by a man who treated it as nothing more than a means to indulge his basest desires. His death at 27 years old left the church reeling, its reputation tarnished, and its holy mission compromised. John XII's papacy became a dark chapter in church history, a cautionary tale of power granted without merit and authority without responsibility. The sacred halls he had defiled would take generations to cleanse of his memory. Yet his story endured as a warning to future generations. It reminded the faithful that even the highest spiritual office could be corrupted when virtue was sacrificed on the altar of worldly pleasure. In the centuries that followed, as reformers sought to purify the church, the ghost of John XII haunted their deliberations. His reign stood as a testament to the dangers of allowing political power to overshadow spiritual calling, and of placing the trappings of holy office in unholy hands. His legacy serves not as an example to follow, but as a shadow against which the light of true faith shines more brightly, a reminder that the path to heaven cannot be paved with earthly vices. Ivan the Terrible in the bitter cold of a Moscow winter. As snow blanketed the ancient city's golden domes, a child was born who would forever change the course of Russian history. The year was 1530, and the infant's first cries echoed through the chambers of the Kremlin. They named him Ivan Vasilievich, but history would remember him as Ivan the Terrible, the ruler who would transform Russia through a reign of unprecedented glory and unspeakable horror. Fate marked Ivan for tragedy from his earliest days. When he was merely 3 winters old, his father, Grand Prince Vasily III, succumbed to a mysterious illness, leaving the weight of Moscow's crown upon an infant's brow. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, ruled as regent, but even she could not protect him for long. When Ivan had seen only 8 summers, assassins slipped poison into his mother's cup, leaving the boy prince alone in a nest of vipers. The young prince's childhood became a crucible of cruelty. The boyars, Russia's noble families, treated the heir to the throne like a plaything, stealing from his treasury and mocking him at court. Ivan would wake to find his chambers plundered, go hungry while nobles feasted, and watch helplessly as those who showed him kindness mysteriously disappeared. These years carved deep wounds in his soul, planting seeds of paranoia and revenge that would later bloom into terrible flowers. Yet even in those dark days, Ivan showed signs of extraordinary potential. While other noble children practiced swordplay, he devoured books with an almost fevered intensity. Religious texts, histories of Rome and Byzantium, tales of great emperors, these became his companions and teachers. In their pages, he found a vision of divine kingship that would shape his destiny. He came to see himself not merely as a prince, but as God's chosen instrument for Russia's transformation. When Ivan reached his 16th year, in 1547, he seized control of his destiny. In a ceremony that stunned his nobles, he proclaimed himself Tsar of all Russia, a title no ruler had dared to claim before. This was more than mere grandeur. It was a declaration of divine right, placing him above the boyars who had tormented his youth. The message was clear. He would rule not by their consent, but by God's will alone. The early years of Ivan's reign glowed with promise. He surrounded himself with wise advisors, implemented sweeping legal reforms, and modernized Russia's military. He created the Streltsy, Russia's first standing army, and launched ambitious campaigns that pushed Russia's borders toward the Caspian Sea. Under his guidance, Moscow began to transform from a medieval city into the capital of an empire. He even convened the Zemsky Sabor, Russia's first parliament, showing glimpses of a ruler who might combine strength with wisdom. But beneath the surface of these achievements, darker currents stirred. The death of his beloved wife Anastasia in 1560 marked the beginning of his descent into madness. Ivan became convinced that she had been poisoned by treacherous boyars, and grief twisted into rage in his heart. His paranoia, fed by years of childhood trauma, bloomed into full flower. The reformer began to vanish, replaced by someone far more terrifying. In 1565, Ivan unleashed the full fury of his transformed nature. He created the Oprichnina, a state within the state, served by the dreaded Oprichniki, his personal army of terror. These men, dressed in black and riding black horses, carried the symbolic dog's head and broom, representing their duty to sniff out treason and sweep away Russia's enemies. They became the instruments of Ivan's growing paranoia, turning Russia into a land of horror. The Oprichniki descended upon the boyar families like wolves upon sheep. Ancient noble houses were destroyed, their lands seized, their members subjected to tortures that defied description. Cities that showed the slightest hint of disloyalty faced devastating punishment. In 1570, the city of Novgorod learned the full measure of Ivan's wrath. Believing the city harbored traitors, he ordered its destruction. For weeks, the Oprichniki rampaged through the streets, slaughtering thousands. The waters of the Volkhov River ran red with blood, carrying the bodies of men, women, and children toward Lake Ilmen. But perhaps the most tragic moment of Ivan's reign came in 1581, when rage turned against his own blood. In a moment of blind fury, he struck his son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with his iron-tipped staff. As he cradled his dying son in his arms, the full weight of his madness finally became clear to him. He had killed not just his heir, but Russia's future. The moment marked the beginning of the end for both Ivan and his dynasty. When death finally claimed Ivan in March of 1584, he left behind a Russia transformed, but not in the way he had once dreamed. His empire had grown vastly in size and power, but its soul had been scarred by decades of terror. The reforms of his early reign lay buried beneath the weight of his later cruelties. Without a strong heir to take the throne, Russia plunged into the time of troubles, a period of chaos and foreign invasion that nearly destroyed the state he had worked so hard to build. Ivan's legacy remains a paradox that haunts Russian history. He created the foundations of a mighty empire, yet nearly destroyed it through his paranoid cruelty. He sought to make Russia great, yet his methods left deep wounds in the national psyche. He began as a reformer, but ended as a tyrant, his early promise consumed by the demons of his past. In the centuries since his death, historians have debated whether Ivan was truly terrible, or simply a product of his brutal times. Was he a madman, or a ruthless ruler doing what he thought necessary to forge a strong state? Perhaps he was both, a complex figure shaped by childhood trauma, divine ambition, and the heavy burden of power. His reign stands as a reminder that the line between greatness and terror can be perilously thin, and that power, when wedded to fear and paranoia, can birth both empire and nightmare. Mary, Queen of Scots, on a bitter December night in 1542, as winter winds howled through the ancient stones of Linlithgow Palace, Scotland welcomed its newest monarch into the world. The infant girl, Mary Stuart, drew her first breath in a realm torn by clan rivalries, religious strife, and the ever-present shadow of English ambition. None could have predicted that this newborn queen would become one of history's most tragic figures. Her life a tapestry, woven with threads of passion, power, and ultimately devastating loss. When Mary was but 6 days old, her father, King James V, lay dying at Falkland Palace. Upon hearing that his wife had borne a daughter rather than a son, he reportedly whispered, "It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass," referring to how the Stuart dynasty had gained the crown through a woman. With these prophetic words, he surrendered his spirit, leaving Scotland in the hands of an infant queen. The child queen's early years were marked by political turbulence. Her mother, Mary of Guise, a formidable French noblewoman, fought fiercely to protect her daughter's inheritance. England's King Henry VIII, seeing opportunity in Scotland's weakness, pursued an aggressive policy he called the rough wooing, attempting to force a marriage between young Mary and his son Edward through military pressure and diplomatic threats. To safeguard their queen, Scotland's nobles made a bold decision. In 1548, 5-year-old Mary was sent to France, accompanied by her 4 Marys, noble girls chosen as her companions. The French court, then the most sophisticated in Europe, became her new home. Here, under the guidance of her Guy's relatives, Mary blossomed into an extraordinary young woman. She mastered French, Latin, Greek, Italian, and Spanish, wrote poetry, played the lute, and excelled at falconry and needlework. Her education was exemplary, encompassing literature, history, geography, and the art of rulership. At the French court, Mary's grace and beauty became legendary. The poet Ronsard, enchanted by her presence, dedicated verses to the Scottish rose. Her betrothed, the Dauphin Francis, grew genuinely fond of her, and their marriage in 1558 seemed to promise a bright future. When Henry II of France died the following year, Mary became Queen of France as well as Scotland, fulfilling the dream of a powerful Franco-Scottish alliance. But fortune's wheel turned swiftly. Francis, never strong in health, died after barely 18 months on the throne. Mary, now a widow at 18, found herself adrift in a French court dominated by her mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici. With remarkable courage, she chose to return to Scotland, a land she barely knew, to claim her birthright. The Scotland Mary returned to in 1561 was vastly different from the Catholic realm of her infancy. The fiery Protestant preacher John Knox had transformed the religious landscape, denouncing Mary as a Jezebel even before she set foot on Scottish soil. His powerful sermons against female rulers and Catholic idolatry helped fuel a reformation that had turned Scotland predominantly Protestant. Despite these challenges, Mary initially showed remarkable political skill. She maintained a careful balance between Catholic and Protestant interests, allowed freedom of worship, and worked to modernize Scotland's legal system. She held court at Holyrood Palace with Renaissance sophistication, introducing French culture and refinements previously unknown in Scotland. Her personal charm and intelligence won over many who had opposed her. Yet Mary's position remained precarious. Her choice of second husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, proved disastrous. Though handsome and of royal blood, Darnley was arrogant, dissolute, and increasingly unstable. Their marriage, which had promised to strengthen Mary's claim to the English throne, as Darnley was Elizabeth's cousin, instead became a source of growing scandal. The murder of Mary's Italian secretary, David Rizzio, marked a turning point. Darnley, consumed by jealousy and ambition, joined Protestant lords in brutally stabbing Rizzio 66 times before the pregnant queen's eyes. This act of violence in March 1566 haunted Mary forever, though she showed remarkable composure in the aftermath, even reconciling briefly with Darnley for the sake of their unborn child. The birth of her son, James, in June should have secured Mary's position. Instead, events spiraled toward tragedy. In February 1567, Darnley was murdered at Kirk-o-Field, his body found in the garden after an explosion. The prime suspect, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, was acquitted in a hasty trial. Then, 3 months later, became Mary's third husband, a decision that sealed her fate. Whether Mary married Bothwell willingly or under duress remains debated. The discovery of the controversial casket letters, purported correspondence between Mary and Bothwell, further damaged her reputation, though many historians now believe these were elaborate forgeries. Regardless, the Scottish nobility rose in rebellion, forcing Mary to abdicate in favor of her infant son. Her subsequent flight to England, seeking protection from her cousin Elizabeth, proved a fatal mistake. Elizabeth, facing pressure from Protestant advisors, and haunted by the potential threat Mary posed as a Catholic heir with a strong claim to the English throne, kept her cousin under comfortable but strict house arrest for 19 years. During her captivity, Mary became a focal point for Catholic plots against Elizabeth. She occupied herself with needlework, creating elaborate tapestries that still survive today, and wrote countless letters advocating for her release. She also maintained regular correspondence with European rulers and her son James, though she would never see him again after her abdication. The Babington Plot of 1586 provided Elizabeth with the pretext she needed, though Mary's direct involvement remains disputed. Her coded letters to the conspirators were intercepted by Elizabeth's spymaster, Francis Walsingham. After a trial that was more political theater than justice, Mary was sentenced to death. On the 8th of February, 1587, Mary faced her end with remarkable dignity. She dressed in crimson, the color of Catholic martyrdom, and spoke her last words in Latin. Her little dog, hidden beneath her skirts, refused to leave her body after the execution. In a final indignity, when the executioner raised her head, her wig fell off, revealing gray hair and the ravages of her long imprisonment. Yet Mary's death achieved what her life could not. Her son James eventually inherited both crowns, uniting England and Scotland under one monarch. Though he showed little filial loyalty, never attempting to rehabilitate his mother's reputation, Mary's tragic story has inspired countless works of art, literature, and drama, becoming a powerful symbol of the price of power and the complexity of female rulership in a male-dominated world. Today, Mary Stuart remains one of history's most enigmatic figures, a queen who held two crowns but could keep neither, a woman whose heart led her to disastrous choices, and a ruler whose greatest legacy came through the very son who never knew her. Her life stands as a testament to the turbulent politics of the 16th century, where religion, power, and personal passion intertwined with often fatal consequences. Queen Ranavalona I on the vast island of Madagascar, where ancient baobab trees stand sentinel over red earth and emerald forests. A queen arose who would defy the might of Europe's greatest empires. Born into a humble family in the late 18th century, she would become Ranavalona I, a ruler whose name would inspire both terror and admiration, whose reign would preserve her nation's independence while bathing it in blood. The story of Ranavalona begins not in a palace, but in a commoner's home. Her father, a skilled advisor, had uncovered a plot against King Andrianampoinimarina, the great unifier of Madagascar. In gratitude, the king adopted the young girl into the royal household, setting in motion a chain of events that would reshape the island's destiny. She was given the name Ramavo and was arranged to marry the king's son and heir, Raidama. Madagascar of the early 19th century was a land of striking contrasts. The Merina Kingdom, centered in the central highlands around Antananarivo, had only recently united much of the island under one rule. Traditional beliefs, where ancestors guided the living and taboos governed daily life, held strong sway. The royal court was a complex web of power, where ancient customs mixed with new ambitions. When Raidama became king in 1810, he embarked on an ambitious program of modernization. He welcomed European missionaries, particularly the London Missionary Society, who brought not only Christianity but also modern education and technology. The first Malagasy alphabet was developed, schools were established, and trade flourished. But within the palace, his wife Ramavo watched these changes with growing concern. For her, each European innovation seemed to chip away at Madagascar's soul. She saw how other African kingdoms had fallen to colonial powers, their traditions erased, their people enslaved to foreign interests. In the missionary schools, she saw children learning to despise their ancestors' ways. In trade agreements, she recognized the first steps toward economic bondage. When Raidama died in 1828, many expected his nephew to inherit the throne, following traditional succession. But Ramavo had spent years building alliances within the military and among traditionalist nobles. With their support, she seized power in a swift, ruthless coup, executing potential rivals and declaring herself Queen Ranavalona I. Her reign marked a dramatic reversal of Raidama's policies, but it was more complex than mere reaction. She modernized the army, incorporating European military techniques while maintaining traditional command structures. She established factories for producing muskets and ammunition, ensuring Madagascar would not depend on foreign weapons. Under her rule, the army grew to over 30,000 trained soldiers, supported by a broader militia of over 100,000. The Queen's most controversial policies centered on her treatment of Christians and Europeans. She saw Christianity as more than just a religion, it was a potential fifth column, creating divided loyalties among her subjects. In 1835, she banned Christian practice, but her persecution was as much political as religious. Those who converted were seen as rejecting not just traditional beliefs, but the authority of the crown itself. Her method of testing loyalty, the Tangina ordeal, reflected ancient Malagasy practices taken to terrible extremes. Accused persons were forced to drink a poison extracted from the Tangina nut while reciting their innocence. Survival was taken as a sign of divine vindication, death as proof of guilt. Under Ranavalona, this traditional justice system became a tool of state terror, claiming thousands of lives. Yet even as she ruled through fear, Ranavalona proved remarkably effective at maintaining Madagascar's independence. When French and British forces attempted to establish coastal footholds in 1845, they found themselves facing not just military resistance, but sophisticated diplomatic maneuvering. The Queen played European powers against each other, while using Madagascar's geography, its fever-ridden coasts and dense forests, as natural defenses. Life in her capital of Antananarivo reflected the contradictions of her reign. The royal palace, the Rova, combined traditional wooden structures with modern stone fortifications designed by French engineers. Her court maintained elaborate ceremonies and traditions, while adopting useful foreign innovations in metallurgy and manufacturing. She sponsored the creation of Madagascar's first printed books, while simultaneously restricting their content to non-religious matters. The human cost of her policies was staggering. Forced labor on public works projects, military campaigns, and the Tangina ordeal claimed tens of thousands of lives. Traditional historians estimate that the population of Madagascar may have declined from 5 million to 2.5 million during her reign, though modern scholars debate these figures. Yet Ranavalona also achieved what few African rulers of her era managed. She kept her country free from colonial domination. While other kingdoms fell to European powers, Madagascar remained fiercely independent. She developed domestic industries, maintained a strong military, and preserved traditional Malagasy culture at a time when indigenous practices were being erased across much of Africa. In her later years, as European pressure mounted, Ranavalona became increasingly isolated. Her son and heir, Ranavalona I, openly opposed her policies and surrounded himself with European advisors. Yet she maintained her grip on power until her death in 1861. After 33 years on the throne, the Queen's passing marked the end of an era. Her son quickly reversed her isolationist policies, but his rule lasted barely 2 years before he was assassinated. Madagascar would maintain its independence for another 3 decades, before finally falling to French colonial rule in 1896. Today, Ranavalona's legacy remains deeply contested. To some, she was a monster, a brutal tyrant who sacrificed her own people's lives to maintain power. To others, she was a patriot who recognized the existential threat of European colonialism and took harsh but necessary measures to preserve Madagascar's independence and cultural identity. Perhaps she was both, a ruler whose methods were cruel, but whose understanding of the colonial threat was prescient. Her reign demonstrated both the potential and the price of absolute resistance to foreign domination. In an era when African kingdoms were falling one by one to European powers, she kept Madagascar independent through sheer force of will, though the cost in human lives and suffering was horrific. The story of Ranavalona I raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of resistance to colonialism and the price of preserving cultural independence. In her determination to prevent foreign domination, she created a regime of domestic terror. In her effort to save Madagascar's soul, she nearly destroyed its body. Her reign stands as a testament to the complex choices faced by indigenous rulers in the age of colonial expansion, and the often terrible costs of resistance. Alexander the Great in the shadow of Mount Olympus, where ancient gods were said to dwell. A child was born who would shake the foundations of the known world. It was the summer of 356 before the Common Era when, in the Macedonian capital of Pella, Queen Olympias gave birth to Alexander, son of King Philip II. Legend says that on the night of his birth, the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned to the ground. For, as the soothsayers claimed, Artemis was away, attending the birth of one who would conquer Asia. Macedonia of that era was transforming from a backwater kingdom into a formidable power under Philip's leadership. He had revolutionized warfare with the creation of the phalanx, a devastating infantry formation armed with long spears called sarissas, and the companion cavalry, the most formidable mounted force of its time. Young Alexander grew up watching his father forge Greek city-states into a unified force through a combination of military might and diplomatic cunning. His mother, Olympias, a princess of Epirus, wielded influence through mysticism and intrigue. She traced her lineage to Achilles and insisted that Alexander's true father was Zeus himself. She kept serpents in her chambers and participated in mysterious Dionysian rites, cultivating an aura of divine connection that profoundly influenced her son's sense of destiny. Alexander's education was as extraordinary as his parentage. At the age of 13, his father summoned Aristotle, the greatest mind of the age, to tutor the prince. In the temple of the nymphs at Mieza, Aristotle taught not just philosophy and politics, but also medicine, geography, zoology, and the arts. Alexander developed a passionate love for Homer's Iliad, sleeping with a copy under his pillow, annotated by Aristotle himself. He learned to question, to observe, to strategize skills that would serve him as well as his military training. The young prince proved himself early. At 16, while Philip was away campaigning, Alexander served as regent of Macedonia. When the Thracian Mede revolted, he led an army against them, defeated the rebels, and founded his first city, Alexandropolis. More significantly, he tamed the magnificent horse Bucephalus, which no one else could ride. "My son," Philip declared, "seek a kingdom worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you." When Philip was assassinated in 336 before the Common Era, Alexander, aged 20, moved with lightning speed to secure his throne. He executed potential rivals, quashed rebellions in Greece, and made a spectacular show of force by destroying Thebes when it defied him. The city was razed to the ground, except for the house of the poet Pindar, whom Alexander admired, an early indication of how he would combine ruthlessness with cultural sophistication. His campaign against Persia began 2 years later, with an army of 40,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Before crossing into Asia, he visited Troy, where he sacrificed to Athena and ran naked around the tomb of Achilles, his legendary ancestor. This fusion of military campaign with cultural and religious significance would characterize all his conquests. The Battle of Granicus showcased Alexander's tactical genius and personal courage. Leading his companion cavalry, he plunged into the river against a superior Persian force. His purple plume was shorn off by an enemy sword, and only the intervention of Cletus the Black saved his life. The victory opened Asia Minor to Macedonian control. At Issus, he defeated Darius III himself, capturing the Persian king's family. Alexander treated them with unexpected courtesy, addressing Darius's mother as his own. This policy of respect for Persian culture and institutions would become crucial to his empire-building strategy. The siege of Tyre in 332, before the Common Era, demonstrated his engineering prowess. When the island city refused to surrender, Alexander built a causeway through the sea to reach it, turning a navy-less army into an unstoppable amphibious force. The conquest of this supposedly impregnable fortress enhanced his aura of invincibility. In Egypt, he was welcomed as a liberator. He respected Egyptian religion and was crowned as pharaoh in Memphis. His founding of Alexandria showed his genius for city planning and cultural synthesis. The city was designed to be a bridge between East and West, with wide colonnaded streets, a perfect harbor, and quarters for Greeks, Egyptians, and Jews. It would become the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. The Battle of Gaugamela in 331, before the Common Era, was his masterpiece of tactical warfare. Outnumbered at least 2-1, he used the enemy's superior numbers against them, creating a gap in their line with a feigned retreat, then leading his companion cavalry in a charge straight at Darius. The Persian king fled, and the heart of the empire lay open. Alexander's entry into Babylon was a triumph of political theater. Instead of appearing as a conqueror, he presented himself as the legitimate successor to the Persian throne, wearing a mixture of Macedonian and Persian royal clothing. He retained Persian administrators and respected local customs, creating a new model of multicultural empire. As he pressed eastward into Central Asia and India, Alexander increasingly adopted Persian customs, much to the dismay of his Macedonian veterans. At Susa, he arranged mass marriages between his officers and Persian noblewomen, himself wedding Darius's daughter Statira. He incorporated Persian units into his army and trained 30,000 Persian youths in Macedonian warfare, creating a truly multinational force. The Battle of the Hydaspes River in India tested his army against war elephants and demonstrated his ability to adapt tactics to new challenges. His respect for the Indian king Porus, whom he reinstated as a satrap after defeating him, showed his growing appreciation for non-Greek cultures. But at the Hyphasis River, his army finally refused to go further. Standing in the rain, Alexander spent 3 days in his tent before accepting the inevitable: his return march through the Gedrosian desert, an unnecessary hardship he shared with his men, displayed both his stubbornness and his willingness to suffer alongside his troops. In Babylon, as he planned new campaigns, fever struck him down. He died in June of 323 before the Common Era, just shy of his 33rd birthday. His last words, to the strongest, unleashed decades of war among his successors. Alexander's legacy transcended military conquest. He created a new world where Greek culture fused with Eastern traditions, spawning the Hellenistic Age. His cities became centers of trade and learning. The Greek language became the lingua franca from Egypt to India, facilitating the exchange of ideas across cultures. Sciences flourished, religions mingled, and art forms blended in unprecedented ways. His empire fragmented after his death, but the cultural synthesis he initiated endured for centuries. Buddhist art shows Greek influence. Indian astronomy incorporates Greek elements, and Persian administrative systems merged with Macedonian military organization. He had created not just an empire, but a new worldview where East and West could meet and mingle. Perhaps Alexander's greatest legacy was the idea that humanity, despite its differences, could be united under a common civilization. Though his methods were often brutal, his vision of cultural fusion and universal brotherhood influenced everything from the Roman Empire to modern concepts of globalization. He showed that the world was larger and more diverse than anyone had imagined, yet could still be bound together through shared culture and commerce. Today, Alexander remains a symbol of both the heights of human ambition and its costs, of the possibility of transcending cultural boundaries, and the price of doing so through conquest. His story reminds us that great changes in history often come through individuals who dare to imagine a different world and have the will to create it. Ramses II in the Golden Age of ancient Egypt, when the two lands stretched from the Mediterranean to Nubia, a child was born who would become the most renowned pharaoh in history. In the year 1303 before the Common Era, during the reign of Seti I, the gods blessed Egypt with a prince who would rule for nearly 7 decades, build monuments that would outlast civilizations, and earn the title Ramses the Great. Born into the 19th dynasty of the New Kingdom, young Ramses entered a world where Egypt had recovered its glory after the tumultuous Amarna period. His father, Pharaoh Seti I, was determined that his son would continue the dynasty's mission of restoring Egypt to its former greatness. From his earliest years, Ramses was groomed for kingship, learning the arts of warfare, diplomacy, and divine kingship that would shape his long reign. The Egypt of Ramses's youth was a land of unprecedented wealth and power. The gold mines of Nubia filled the treasury, while grain from the fertile Nile Valley fed a population of several million. Trade routes stretched from Mesopotamia to the Horn of Africa, bringing exotic goods and new ideas into the two lands. This was the world that shaped young Ramses's vision of Egyptian greatness. At the remarkably young age of 14, Ramses was appointed prince regent by his father. He accompanied Seti on military campaigns, learning the art of warfare firsthand. These early experiences would prove invaluable, teaching him not just military strategy, but also the importance of personal courage and the art of propaganda skills he would employ throughout his reign. When Ramses ascended to the throne in his early 20s, he inherited an empire at its peak. Yet he was determined to surpass even his father's achievements. His reign would be marked by ambitious building projects, military campaigns, and diplomatic initiatives that would define Egypt for centuries to come. The defining moment of his military career came early in his reign at the Battle of Kadesh, fought against the Hittite Empire in what is now Syria. Leading an army of 20,000 men, Ramses found himself caught in a clever ambush by Hittite forces. The pharaoh's personal valor in this crisis became the stuff of legend. According to his own account, when his army fled, leaving him surrounded by enemy chariots, he single-handedly turned the tide of battle, rallying his troops and charging into the enemy ranks. While modern historians debate the actual outcome of Kadesh, it appears to have been more of a stalemate than the great victory Ramses claimed. The pharaoh's propaganda machine transformed it into Egypt's greatest triumph. The battle scenes were carved on temple walls throughout Egypt, accompanied by vivid descriptions of Ramses's courage. These reliefs, still visible today, represent one of history's first large-scale propaganda campaigns. More significant than the battle itself was the peace treaty that followed. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed in the 21st year of Ramses's reign, ended decades of conflict between Egypt and the Hittites. This document, whose clay tablet copies survive in both Egyptian and Hittite versions, is one of the earliest known peace treaties in history. It established diplomatic relations, mutual defense pacts, and extradition agreements between the two great powers. As a builder, Ramses surpassed all who came before him. His greatest achievement was the temple complex at Abu Simbel, carved into the living rock of a cliff face in Nubia. The main temple, dedicated to Ramses himself and the great gods of Egypt, features 4 colossal seated statues of the pharaoh, each reaching a height of 65 feet. The temple was positioned with such precision that twice a year, on Ramses's birthday and coronation day, the rising sun would penetrate the entire length of the temple to illuminate the statues of the gods in the sanctuary. At Thebes, Ramses completed the great hypostyle hall at Karnak Temple, the largest religious building ever constructed. His mortuary temple, the Ramesseum, was a massive complex that included libraries, workshops, and granaries alongside the religious structures. In the Delta, he built an entirely new capital city, Pi-Ramesses, which became one of the largest and most splendid cities of its time. But Ramses was more than just a warrior and builder. He was also a family man on an epic scale. His chief wife, Nefertari, was clearly the love of his life. He built her a magnificent tomb in the Valley of the Queens and dedicated a temple to her at Abu Simbel, where her statues stand as tall as his own, a remarkable honor in ancient Egypt. The walls of Nefertari's tomb, with their brilliantly preserved paintings, still testify to their love story after more than 3,000 years. Over his long life, Ramses fathered more than 100 children with his various wives and concubines. He outlived many of them, including his beloved Nefertari and several of his sons. But he ensured the dynasty's continuation by carefully managing the succession. His 13th son, Meremptah, would eventually succeed him after serving as crown prince for several decades. As an administrator, Ramses showed remarkable skill in managing his vast empire. He reorganized the bureaucracy, established new mining operations, and maintained Egypt's traditional control over vital trade routes. His reign saw unprecedented building activity not just in grand temples, but also in practical infrastructure. New cities, harbor facilities, and irrigation systems that improved the lives of ordinary Egyptians. In his religious policy, Ramses combined traditional piety with innovation. He presented himself as the son of all the great gods of Egypt, particularly emphasizing his connection to Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. Yet he also promoted his own divine cult to an unprecedented degree, placing his statues in temples throughout Egypt and Nubia. Some of these statues were so massive that later generations would believe they could only have been built by giants. When Ramses died in his early 90s, in the 66th year of his reign, Egypt had experienced its longest period of peace and prosperity in history. He had outlived most of his children and grandchildren, ruling for so long that many Egyptians could not remember any other pharaoh. His mummy, discovered in modern times and now preserved in Cairo's National Museum, shows a tall, strong man with proud features and red hair, still impressive even in death. The legacy of Ramses the Great extended far beyond his own time. His buildings, even in ruins, influenced classical Greek and Roman visitors to Egypt. His reputation for greatness inspired later rulers, from Alexander the Great to Napoleon, who studied his monuments with awe. When his mummy was flown to Paris for restoration in 1976, it received a full military honor guard, the only time an ancient Egyptian pharaoh has been accorded the status of a modern head of state. Today, Ramses II remains perhaps the most recognizable of all ancient Egyptian rulers. His monuments, though weathered by time, still stand as testimony to his ambition to create works that would last forever. His peace treaty with the Hittites hangs on the walls of the United Nations as one of the earliest examples of international diplomacy. His name, which he carved so profusely on every available surface, has achieved the immortality he sought. In the end, Ramses the Great represents both the heights that human ambition can reach and the enduring human desire to leave a mark on history. His boast, inscribed on countless monuments, "I am Ramses, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair," has proved prophetic. After more than 3,000 years, his works still inspire awe, and his name still echoes through the corridors of time. Ashoka the Great in the golden age of ancient India, when the subcontinent was a tapestry of kingdoms and philosophies. A prince was born who would transform not just an empire, but the very nature of kingship itself. In the year 304 before the Common Era, in the magnificent city of Pataliputra, Ashoka entered the world as a prince of the mighty Mauryan dynasty, destined to become not just its greatest ruler, but one of history's most remarkable examples of personal transformation. The India of Ashoka's youth was a land of extraordinary diversity and sophistication. The Mauryan Empire, founded by his grandfather Chandragupta, with the guidance of the brilliant strategist Chanakya, stretched from Bengal to Afghanistan. It was an age of great philosophical ferment, where Buddhist monks, Jain ascetics, and Brahmin scholars debated in the streets and courts of cities that rivaled any in the world for their wealth and learning. Young Ashoka grew up in the shadow of his father, Emperor Bindusara, known as Amitrighata, the slayer of enemies. Though not the favored son, Ashoka distinguished himself through his martial prowess and administrative skill. As a prince, he served as governor of the vital provinces of Ujjain and Taxila, where he demonstrated both his military capabilities and his stern approach to maintaining order. When Bindusara died, a succession crisis erupted among his sons. The Buddhist chronicles tell us that Ashoka emerged victorious only after a 4-year struggle that left all his brothers dead. Whether through violence or political maneuvering, he secured the throne and began to expand the already vast Mauryan Empire with ruthless efficiency. His early reign earned him the epithet Shandashoka, Ashoka the Terrible. He created a fearsome secret service, established a network of spies, and maintained an army of unprecedented size. The Buddhist texts speak of his notorious hell on earth, a prison designed to inflict elaborate tortures, though some scholars suggest these accounts may be exaggerated to emphasize his later transformation. The turning point came with the Kalinga War in the 8th year of his reign. Kalinga, corresponding to modern-day Odisha, was the last major independent kingdom in India. Its conquest would complete the Mauryan domination of the subcontinent. The war was one of the bloodiest in ancient Indian history, according to Ashoka's own words, carved in stone. 150,000 were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number died. Standing on the battlefield of Kalinga, surveying the carnage he had wrought, Ashoka experienced what would now be called a profound existential crisis. The Buddhist texts describe him walking the battlefield, seeing the broken bodies, hearing the laments of the bereaved, and being overcome with remorse. This moment of reckoning led him to embrace Buddhism, though not as a monk renouncing the world, but as a ruler seeking to govern through moral principle rather than force. His conversion to Buddhism marked the beginning of a revolutionary experiment in governance. Through his famous edicts, carved on rocks and pillars across his vast empire, Ashoka articulated a new vision of kingship based on dharma, not just religious doctrine, but universal moral law. These edicts, written in various vernacular languages, represent the first large-scale political communications in human history. The principles of Ashoka's Dharma were practical and universal. Respect for all life, tolerance of all faiths, care for the welfare of all beings. He established hospitals for both humans and animals, planted medicinal herbs throughout his empire, and sent missions to provide medical care in neighboring kingdoms. He banned animal sacrifice, restricted hunting, and created rest houses along major roads for travelers. His administrative reforms were equally revolutionary. He appointed special officers called Dharma Mahamatras to promote moral behavior and welfare throughout the empire. He established a system of shade trees and wells along major roads, created veterinary clinics, and instituted regular tour of his empire to personally oversee the welfare of his people. Ashoka's promotion of Buddhism took the form of both state support and personal example. He built thousands of stupas and monasteries, including the great Sanchi Stupa, which still stands today. But perhaps more importantly, he sent Buddhist missions to lands far beyond his empire, to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and even to the Hellenistic kingdoms of the West. These missions marked the first organized attempt to spread a religious and philosophical system peacefully across cultural boundaries. His famous lion capital at Sarnath, now the national emblem of India, symbolizes his rule's key principles: strength, courage, and power, all guided by Dharma, represented by the wheel. The four lions, facing the cardinal directions, proclaim his message to all quarters of the world, while the wheel represents the eternal law of righteousness. Ashoka's vision of governance influenced rulers across Asia. His grandson Devanampriya Tissa established Buddhism in Sri Lanka, where it flourishes to this day. His example inspired later rulers like King Harsha and the Thai King Ramkhamhaeng to govern according to Buddhist principles. Even in modern times, leaders like India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru looked to Ashoka as a model of enlightened leadership. Yet Ashoka's reign was not simply about religious conversion or pacifism. He maintained a strong army and made it clear in his edicts that he would use force if necessary to protect his people. His innovation was to make force the last resort rather than the first choice, and to define success in terms of his people's welfare rather than territorial expansion. After a reign of approximately 40 years, Ashoka died, leaving behind an empire at its peak of prosperity and cultural achievement. Though the Mauryan Empire would decline under his successors, his legacy lived on in ways he could not have imagined. His Dharma wheel appears on India's flag, his lions on its currency, and his principles of religious tolerance and welfare for all beings continue to inspire leaders and thinkers worldwide. The great British historian H.G. Wells wrote of Ashoka, "Amidst the tens of thousands of names of monarchs that crowd the columns of history, their majesties and graciousnesses and serenities and royal highnesses and the like, the name of Ashoka shines, and shines almost alone, a star." Perhaps Ashoka's greatest legacy is the idea that political power can be used not just for conquest and glory, but for moral transformation and human welfare. In an age of increasing violence and intolerance, his example reminds us that even the most warlike heart can be transformed by compassion, and that true greatness lies not in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. In the tumultuous England of the 16th century, when religious strife threatened to tear the nation apart and powerful enemies plotted its destruction, a princess was born who would become her country's greatest monarch. On the 7th of September, 1533, at Greenwich Palace, Elizabeth Tudor entered a world that had little use for royal daughters. Yet she would transform herself into Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, and lead England into its golden age. Elizabeth's early life was a masterclass in survival. Her father, Henry VIII, had broken with Rome and transformed England's religious landscape to marry her mother, Anne Boleyn. When Anne failed to produce a male heir and fell from favor, she met her fate at the executioner's block. Elizabeth, not yet 3 years old, was declared illegitimate and cast into political wilderness. Yet this early trauma shaped her into a master of statecraft. She learned to read faces, gauge intentions, and keep her own counsel. Despite her precarious position, Elizabeth received an extraordinary education. Under the guidance of renowned humanist scholars, particularly Roger Ascham, she became one of Europe's most learned monarchs. By age 11, she could write in Italian and Latin, later adding French, Greek, and Spanish to her linguistic arsenal. She would later boast that she spoke more languages than any other English monarch had ever known. Her adolescence was marked by danger. When her Catholic half-sister Mary seized the throne, Elizabeth became the focus of Protestant hopes and Catholic fears. Implicated in Wyatt's rebellion, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same fortress where her mother had met her end. For 3 months, she lived under the shadow of the axe, yet emerged stronger, having learned the value of patience and circumspection. When Mary died in 1558, Elizabeth ascended to the throne at 25. She inherited a kingdom in crisis. The treasury was empty, religious conflict simmered, and England was entangled in a disastrous war with France. Her first acts demonstrated the political acumen that would characterize her reign. She ended the war, stabilized the currency, and established the Church of England as a unique compromise between Catholicism and Protestantism. Central to Elizabeth's success was her choice of advisors, particularly William Cecil, later Lord Burghley, who served as her chief minister for 40 years. She surrounded herself with capable men, but never allowed any to dominate her. As she famously declared, "I will have here but one mistress and no master." Her refusal to marry became both a political tool and a personal statement. Suitors came from across Europe: Philip of Spain, Eric of Sweden, the Duke of Alençon among them. She entertained their proposals, using the prospect of marriage as a diplomatic lever, but ultimately chose to remain single. This decision allowed her to maintain control of her throne and play potential allies against each other. The greatest challenge to her rule came from her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, who became the focus of Catholic plots against Elizabeth. For 19 years, Elizabeth resisted pressure to execute Mary, understanding the dangerous precedent of killing an anointed monarch. When evidence of Mary's involvement in the Babington plot emerged, Elizabeth signed the death warrant with visible reluctance, understanding the political necessity but mourning the human cost. The defining moment of her reign came in 1588 with the Spanish Armada. Philip of Spain, her former suitor turned enemy, launched the largest naval invasion force Europe had ever seen. Elizabeth's response revealed her genius for leadership. At Tilbury, she appeared before her troops in armor, delivering a speech that still resonates. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The defeat of the Armada ushered in a period of unprecedented cultural flowering. The Elizabethan age saw the emergence of William Shakespeare, whose plays captured the spirit of the age. Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, and Philip Sidney created works that would define English literature. Elizabeth herself was an accomplished poet and musician, making her court a center of artistic innovation. Under her rule, England began its transformation into a maritime power. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe, returning with Spanish treasure that helped fund England's expansion. Walter Raleigh established the first English colony in America, while the East India Company began operations that would eventually lead to Britain's global empire. Elizabeth's support for exploration and commerce laid the foundations for England's future naval dominance. Her court became legendary for its splendor and intrigue. She utilized ceremony and spectacle as political tools, creating an image of herself as both the mother of her people and an almost mythical figure. Gloriana, the fairy queen. Yet she could also connect with common people, making regular progresses through the countryside and maintaining her popularity throughout her long reign. Elizabeth's personal life remained a subject of endless speculation. Her relationship with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was particularly noteworthy. Their evident affection led to scandalous rumors. Yet Elizabeth never allowed emotion to override political judgment. When Dudley married secretly, she felt betrayed, but continued to rely on his counsel in matters of state. Her reign saw significant economic development. She reformed the currency, promoted trade through the charter of new companies, and encouraged industrial development, particularly in cloth manufacturing. The standard of living rose, and a new middle class emerged, changing England's social structure. In matters of religion, Elizabeth chose a middle path that became known as the Via Media. While maintaining Protestant doctrine, she preserved many Catholic traditions, creating a uniquely English form of Christianity. Her policy was pragmatic rather than zealous. As she famously declared, she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. As she aged, Elizabeth continued to project an image of eternal youth through increasingly elaborate makeup and wigs. Yet behind the facade, she remained sharp-witted and determined. In her final years, she faced economic problems, failed harvests, and growing parliamentary opposition, yet maintained her authority until the end. When Elizabeth died in 1603, she left England transformed. The weak, divided nation she had inherited was now a major European power, financially stable, militarily respected, and culturally vibrant. The Tudor dynasty ended with her, but the English Renaissance she had fostered would continue to shape European culture for centuries. Her greatest achievement was perhaps not any single policy or victory, but her ability to hold together a divided nation through decades of religious and political turmoil. She created a national myth of English greatness that survived long after her death, and her reign became a model of successful monarchy that later rulers would strive to emulate. Elizabeth's legacy extends far beyond her era. She demonstrated that a woman could rule effectively in a male-dominated world, not by trying to be a man, but by turning perceived weaknesses into strengths. Her careful balancing of competing factions, her use of imagery and spectacle, and her ability to connect with her people created a new model of monarchy that influenced rulers for generations to come. In the 6th century, before the Common Era, when mighty kingdoms clashed across the ancient Near East and rulers governed through fear and force, a different kind of leader emerged from the Persian highlands. Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, would create not just the largest empire the world had yet seen, but also establish a new model of kingship based on wisdom, tolerance, and justice. The world of Cyrus's birth was one of shifting powers and ancient civilizations. Babylon dominated Mesopotamia, the Medes controlled the Iranian plateau, and Lydia ruled western Anatolia. Egypt, though past its peak, remained a formidable power, while in the east, sophisticated civilizations flourished along the Indus River. Into this complex political landscape, around 600 before the Common Era, Cyrus was born into the Achaemenid dynasty, rulers of the small kingdom of Anshan in Persis. His early life is wrapped in legend, recorded by Herodotus in a tale that would inspire storytellers for generations. According to the story, his grandfather, Astyages, king of the Medes, dreamed that his grandson would overthrow him. He ordered the infant Cyrus killed, but the compassionate official entrusted with the task gave the child to a shepherd family instead. This tale, echoing similar stories of divine protection of chosen rulers, reflects the extraordinary destiny that awaited the young prince. Growing up among the Persian nobility, Cyrus learned the arts of warfare, horsemanship, and governance. The Persians of his time were renowned for their truthfulness, considering lying the greatest disgrace. Their education emphasized physical courage, moral integrity, and judicial wisdom qualities that would later define Cyrus's rule. His rise to power began with the unification of the Persian tribes, a feat accomplished through a combination of military skill and diplomatic acumen. When he challenged his grandfather's rule over the Medes, He did so not just through force of arms, but by winning over key allies within the Median nobility. The union of Medes and Persians created a powerful base for his future conquests. The campaign against Lydia in 547, before the Common Era, demonstrated his military genius. King Croesus of Lydia, famed for his wealth, attacked Cyrus's territory, expecting an easy victory. Instead, Cyrus's innovative use of camels to disrupt the Lydian cavalry led to a decisive victory. More remarkably, he spared Croesus's life and treated him with respect, setting a pattern of clemency that would characterize his rule. His greatest triumph came in 539, before the Common Era, with the conquest of Babylon. Rather than launching a frontal assault on the supposedly impregnable walls, Cyrus diverted the Euphrates River, allowing his army to enter the city through the riverbed. Yet it was his actions after the conquest that truly set him apart. Instead of destroying the city or enslaving its population, as was common practice, he presented himself as a liberator. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay barrel inscribed with his proclamation to the people of Babylon, represents one of history's first declarations of human rights. In it, he promised to respect local customs and religions, allow displaced peoples to return to their homelands, and govern with justice. He freed the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, an act that earned him unprecedented praise in the Hebrew Bible, where he is called God's anointed. His administrative innovations were as impressive as his military achievements. He divided his vast empire into provinces or satrapies, each governed by a satrap responsible for tax collection, justice, and military recruitment. A sophisticated system of roads, including the famous royal road from Susa to Sardis, facilitated communication and trade. Regular postal stations and a corps of mounted messengers ensured swift transmission of orders and intelligence. Cyrus established his capital at Pasargadae, building a city that combined Persian, Median, and conquered peoples' architectural styles. The palace complex included audience halls, residential quarters, and elaborate gardens that would influence Persian architecture for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests the city was designed to impress visitors with its grandeur, while emphasizing the inclusive nature of his empire. His military organization was equally innovative. The imperial army combined heavy infantry, cavalry, and archers from various nations, each fighting in their traditional style, but coordinated under central command. The famous Immortals, an elite force of 10,000 Persian troops, served as the empire's backbone, while conquered peoples contributed their specialized military skills. In religious matters, Cyrus demonstrated unprecedented tolerance. While personally a Zoroastrian, he respected and often supported other faiths. In Babylon, he participated in religious ceremonies honoring Marduk. In Jerusalem, he supported the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. This policy of religious tolerance became a hallmark of Persian rule and influenced later concepts of religious freedom. His death around 530 before the Common Era, came during a campaign against the Massagetae, a nomadic people of Central Asia. According to Herodotus, he was killed in battle against Queen Tomyris, though other accounts suggest he died peacefully at Pasargadae. His tomb, a stepped monument combining elements from various architectural traditions, still stands today, a testament to his lasting legacy. Cyrus's empire would reach its greatest extent under his successors, particularly Darius I, but his principles of governance, religious tolerance, cultural respect, and just rule remained its foundation. His influence extended far beyond his time. Alexander the Great visited his tomb and ordered it protected. The founding fathers of the United States studied his methods of governance. Thomas Jefferson owned 2 copies of the Cyropaedia, Xenophon's biography of Cyrus. His legacy continues to resonate in modern discussions of human rights, religious freedom, and cultural tolerance. The United Nations keeps a copy of the Cyrus Cylinder at its headquarters in New York, recognizing it as an ancient precursor to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Iran, he is remembered as the father of the nation, while in Israel, he is honored as a righteous Gentile who respected Jewish autonomy and faith. Perhaps Cyrus's greatest achievement was demonstrating that an empire could be built and maintained not just through military might, but through respect, tolerance, and justice. In an age of absolute monarchs and cruel conquerors, he showed that power could be tempered with wisdom, and that diverse peoples could be united under a system that respected their differences while promoting their common welfare. His example challenges us to consider whether true greatness lies not in the ability to destroy and dominate, but in the wisdom to build and unite. As the world continues to struggle with questions of cultural diversity, religious tolerance, and just governance, the legacy of Cyrus the Great remains remarkably relevant and inspiring. In the turbulent France of the 17th century, when noble factions threatened royal power and European kingdoms vied for supremacy, a king arose who would define the very essence of absolute monarchy. Born in 1638, Louis XIV would reign for 72 years, transforming France into Europe's most powerful state and establishing a model of kingship that would influence rulers for centuries to come. The France of Louis's birth was a kingdom in transition. The work of Cardinal Richelieu had strengthened royal authority, but powerful nobles still maintained private armies and semi-independent territories. Louis's father, Louis XIII, died when the boy was only 5, leaving the kingdom in the hands of his mother, Anne of Austria, and her chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin. His childhood was marked by the upheaval of the Fronde, a series of civil wars that shaped his understanding of power. Young Louis witnessed nobles betraying their oaths, Paris rising in rebellion, and his own family forced to flee the capital in the dead of night. These experiences instilled in him an unshakable belief in the necessity of absolute royal authority and a deep distrust of the nobility. When Cardinal Mazarin died in 1661, the 22-year-old Louis shocked his court by declaring he would rule without a chief minister. His famous declaration, "L'état, c'est moi," "I am the state," was more than mere arrogance. It expressed his conviction that the monarch must be the direct source of all political authority. Louis systematically transformed the French monarchy. He required the high nobility to live at court, turning them from semi-independent lords into glorified courtiers competing for royal favor. The elaborate ceremonies of daily life at Versailles, from the king's morning levee to his evening coucher, became a form of political theater, where proximity to the king's person marked one's status and influence. The construction of Versailles itself was perhaps his greatest artistic and political achievement. What began as a hunting lodge was transformed into the most magnificent palace in Europe, the Hall of Mirrors, where 17 mirror-lined arches reflected 17 window-lined arches, created a spectacle of light and grandeur that perfectly expressed Louis's vision of monarchy. The gardens, designed by André Le Nôtre, demonstrated human mastery over nature itself, with perfectly geometric layouts and elaborate fountains. Under Jean-Baptiste Colbert, his Minister of Finance, Louis implemented sweeping economic reforms. Colbert promoted manufacturing, established royal monopolies, built roads and canals, and created a merchant marine to challenge Dutch commercial dominance. He established the French Academy of Sciences and supported technological innovation, understanding that economic power underpinned military strength. The king's patronage of the arts created a golden age of French culture. Playwrights Molière, Racine, and Corneille produced masterpieces of dramatic literature. The painter Charles Le Brun decorated Versailles and established the French Academy of Painting and Sculpture. Jean-Baptiste Lully revolutionized French opera, while architects Louis Leval and Jules Hardouin-Mansart created the classical French style that would influence architecture across Europe. Louis's military reforms, carried out by the Marquis de Louvois, created Europe's largest and most professional army. He established officer training schools, standardized weapons and uniforms, and created a system of supply magazines that allowed French armies to campaign more effectively than their rivals. The engineering genius of Vauban transformed both siege warfare and frontier defense through his system of fortifications. His foreign policy aimed at securing France's natural frontiers and establishing French predominance in Europe. Early victories in the War of Devolution and the Dutch War expanded French territory. But later conflicts, particularly the 9 Years' War and the War of Spanish Succession, proved more costly. Though France gained territories, including Alsace and parts of Flanders, constant warfare strained the kingdom's resources. The king's private life was as carefully staged as his public role. His love affairs, particularly with Louise de la Vallière and Madame de Montespan, became matters of state importance. His second, secret marriage to Madame de Maintenon influenced his later religious policy. including the fateful revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which forced Protestants to convert or flee France. Court life at Versailles set standards of sophistication and refinement that other European courts rushed to imitate. The elaborate etiquette, the importance of fashion and manners, the integration of artistic display into daily life. All these became essential elements of European court culture. French became the international language of diplomacy and culture, a position it would maintain for centuries. Yet the splendor of Louis's reign had its dark side. The constant warfare, the cost of maintaining Versailles, and the exemption of the nobility from taxation placed increasing burdens on the common people. The centralization of power, while effective in the short term, would eventually contribute to the rigidity that made the French monarchy unable to reform in the face of changing times. When Louis died in 1715, he left a kingdom that was simultaneously the most powerful and most deeply indebted state in Europe. His final words to his heir, the 5-year-old future Louis XV, captured both the grandeur and the burden of his legacy. "I am going, but the state will always remain." The impact of Louis XIV's reign extended far beyond France. His model of absolute monarchy, combining centralized political authority with cultural sophistication, influenced rulers from Peter the Great of Russia to Frederick the Great of Prussia. The diplomatic system he created, based on permanent embassies and professional diplomats, shaped international relations for centuries. Even the reaction against Louis's absolutism proved influential. The Enlightenment philosophers, while criticizing his autocratic rule, were shaped by the rational, ordered worldview his reign had promoted. The French Revolution, which would eventually sweep away the monarchy he had done so much to strengthen, was in many ways a response to the system he had created. Today, Versailles stands as both monument and metaphor, a testament to the possibility of transforming political power into artistic beauty, but also a reminder of how the pursuit of glory can lead to overreach and eventual decline. Louis XIV's reign represents a unique moment when political power, artistic creativity, and cultural influence combined to create a model of monarchy that would define an era. In the latter half of the 17th century, when Russia remained isolated behind a wall of ancient traditions and religious orthodoxy, a ruler was born who would drag his nation into the modern world through sheer force of will. Peter the Great, born in the year 1672, would transform Russia from a medieval kingdom into a European power through a combination of vision, determination, and often brutal reform. The Russia of Peter's birth was a land frozen in time. The boyars, Russia's ancient nobility, wore long beards and flowing robes that hadn't changed in centuries. The Orthodox Church dominated cultural life, suspicious of foreign influences. Moscow, with its wooden buildings and narrow, winding streets, remained a medieval city, while Western Europe embraced the Baroque splendor of the age of Louis XIV. Young Peter's early years were marked by political intrigue and violence. When his father, Tsar Alexis I, died, the resulting power struggle between the families of his two wives plunged the court into chaos. Peter's half-sister Sophia seized power as regent, ruling in the name of Peter and his disabled half-brother Ivan V. The boy prince found refuge in the German quarter of Moscow, where he first encountered the Western innovations that would fascinate him throughout his life. At the age of 17, in the year 1689, Peter seized power from Sophia, confining her to a convent. His curiosity about Western ways soon led to the Great Embassy, an 18-month journey through Western Europe that would change both him and Russia forever. Traveling incognito as Peter Mikhailov, he worked as a ship's carpenter in Holland, studied navigation in England, and observed European military techniques. He sent back to Russia hundreds of foreign specialists, from shipwrights to surgeons, military engineers to architects. Upon his return, Peter launched a revolution from above. He ordered his nobles to shave their beards and adopt European dress, personally cutting the beards and robes of resistant boyars with his own hands. Those who refused to comply faced a special beard tax, having to carry a copper token proving they had paid for the privilege of maintaining their traditional appearance. His military reforms were equally dramatic. The traditional Streltsy Guard regiments, who had supported his sister Sophia, were disbanded after their rebellion and replaced with a modern standing army organized on European lines. Peter established Russia's first naval fleet from scratch, learning shipbuilding techniques himself and teaching them to others. He created new schools of navigation and engineering, forcing noble families to send their sons abroad to study military science and seamanship. The Great Northern War, lasting 21 years from 1700 to 1721, tested these reforms in combat. Early defeats, particularly at Narva, where the Swedish King Charles XII crushed the Russian army, only strengthened Peter's determination. He famously remarked, "The Swedes will teach us how to beat them." 9 years later, at the Battle of Poltava, they did exactly that. The Russian victory transformed the balance of power in Northern Europe and secured Russia's place as a major European power. Peter's most visible legacy was his new capital, St. Petersburg, founded in the year 1703 on the swampy delta of the Neva River. Built at an enormous human cost, tens of thousands of workers died in its construction. The city rose from the marshes as Russia's window to the west. Peter supervised its construction personally, requiring noble families to build palaces there and move their households from Moscow. The city's grand boulevards, Baroque palaces, and network of canals made it the most European city in Russia. His reforms touched every aspect of Russian life. He reorganized the government, creating a Senate and 12 colleges, ministries, to replace the old Boyar Council. He reformed the Orthodox Church, abolishing the Patriarchate and placing the church under state control through the Holy Synod. He introduced a new alphabet, simplified from Church Slavonic, and ordered the publication of Russia's first newspaper. He established Russia's first museum, the Kunstkamera, filling it with scientific specimens and curiosities from around the world. Peter's personal involvement in these changes was remarkable. Standing 6 feet and 7 inches tall, he worked alongside shipwrights and carpenters, learned dental surgery, practicing on his servants, and maintained a workshop where he turned his own lathes. His endless energy and curiosity drove Russia's transformation, though his methods were often brutal. Those who opposed his reforms faced exile, torture, or execution, including his own son Alexei, who died under questioning about his involvement in a plot against his father. The human cost of Peter's reforms was enormous. His military campaigns, the construction of St. Petersburg, and his modernization programs required massive mobilization of human and material resources. Thousands died in the construction of his new capital alone. Yet he succeeded in transforming Russia from a marginal power into a major European state. When Peter died in the year 1725, having caught a chill while helping to rescue sailors from a shipwreck, he left behind a transformed nation. Russia had expanded its territories, developed its first modern industries, created a powerful army and navy, and established itself as a major European power. He had forced open his nation's windows to the West, letting in not just fresh air but new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences that would shape Russia's development for centuries to come. Peter's legacy was complex. His reforms laid the groundwork for Russia's emergence as a world power, but they also deepened the divide between the Europeanized elite and the traditional masses, a split that would trouble Russia for centuries. His strengthening of autocratic power would influence Russian governance until the Revolution of 1917. Yet his emphasis on merit over birth, his curiosity about the world, and his determination to modernize his nation would inspire reformers throughout Russian history. Today, Peter the Great remains a controversial figure in Russian history. To some, he is the visionary ruler who brought Russia into the modern world. To others, he is the brutal autocrat who sacrificed Russian traditions and countless Russian lives in pursuit of Western ways. Perhaps both perspectives contain truth. He was a modernizer who used medieval methods, a Westernizer who remained thoroughly Russian, a reformer who strengthened autocracy. His complex legacy continues to influence debates about Russia's relationship with the West and its path to modernization. In the twilight of the Hellenistic Age, when ancient Egypt's glory merged with Greek sophistication, a queen arose who would become the last pharaoh of the ancient world. Born in the 69th year before the Common Era, Cleopatra VII emerged from a dynasty of Greek rulers to become an Egyptian icon, wielding intelligence and charm as powerful weapons in a male-dominated world. The Alexandria of Cleopatra's youth was the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, a city of marble colonnades and brilliant scholars. The Great Lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, guided ships into a harbor bustling with trade from 3 continents. In the famous library, scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. This was the sophisticated world that shaped young Cleopatra's extraordinary mind. Unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, who had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries while barely speaking its ancient language, Cleopatra immersed herself in Egyptian culture. She learned to speak Egyptian, studied the ancient religious texts, and presented herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. She was also fluent in Greek, Hebrew, Ethiopian, Arabic, Syrian, Median, and Parthian. A true polyglot in an age when most rulers relied on interpreters. Her early life was marked by the complexities of Ptolemaic power politics. Her father, Ptolemy XII, nicknamed the flute player for his love of revelry, had nearly lost the kingdom through mismanagement and was restored only through Roman intervention. When he died, the 18-year-old Cleopatra was forced to share power with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, whom she was expected to marry in keeping with Ptolemaic tradition. The arrival of Julius Caesar in Egypt in the 48th year, before the Common Era, changed everything. Civil war had erupted between Cleopatra and her brother, forcing her from Alexandria. Her return to power demonstrated the brilliant theatrical flair that would become legendary. Having herself smuggled into the palace wrapped in a carpet, she was unrolled at Caesar's feet, a dramatic entrance that captured both his imagination and his support. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar was both political and personal. She bore him a son, Caesarion, but more importantly, she secured Roman support for her rule. During her visits to Rome, she observed firsthand the power and limitations of the Republic that dominated the Mediterranean. She stayed in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, causing scandal among conservative Romans who were shocked to see a foreign queen openly acknowledged as Caesar's consort. After Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March in the 44th year before the Common Era, Cleopatra returned to Egypt. She had learned valuable lessons about Roman politics and power. When civil war erupted between Caesar's assassins and his supporters, she carefully maintained Egypt's neutrality while quietly supporting Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's chosen heir. Her famous first meeting with Mark Antony at Tarsus showed her mastery of political theater. She arrived in a golden barge with purple sails, its oars keeping time to the music of flutes and lyres. She appeared dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, surrounded by attendants dressed as cupids and nereids. This calculated display enchanted Antony, a man who appreciated spectacle as much as she did. Their subsequent relationship combined romance with pragmatic political alliance. Together, they envisioned a restored Eastern Mediterranean empire that would rival Rome. Cleopatra received confirmation of her rule over Egypt and Cyprus, along with portions of Libya and other territories. she began ambitious construction projects in Alexandria, strengthening Egypt's position as a naval power. Yet this dream of Eastern revival alarmed Rome. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, launched a brilliant propaganda campaign against the couple. He portrayed Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, abandoning Roman virtue for Oriental luxury. He published Antony's will, which left territory to Cleopatra's children, and expressed his wish to be buried in Alexandria rather than Rome. This masterful manipulation of public opinion turned Roman sentiment against Antony and Cleopatra. The Battle of Actium in the 31st year, before the Common Era, marked the beginning of the end. Though Cleopatra and Antony commanded a powerful fleet, Octavian's forces proved superior. The queen's departure from the battle with her ships has often been portrayed as cowardly retreat, but it was likely a strategic withdrawal to preserve Egypt's strength. The final act of Cleopatra's life showed the same dramatic flair that had marked her reign. Rather than face the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as Octavian's captive, she chose a death worthy of the pharaohs. The traditional account of her end, death by asp bite, combines Egyptian religious symbolism. The cobra was sacred to the kings of Egypt, with the practical reality of a swift and relatively painless death. She died in the 30th year before the Common Era, at the age of 39, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the last active pharaoh of Egypt. With her death, the age of the Hellenistic kingdoms ended, and Egypt became a Roman province. Caesarion, her son by Caesar and the last male descendant of both Caesar and Alexander the Great, was executed on Octavian's orders. Yet Cleopatra's influence outlived her. Her image has fascinated artists, writers, and historians for 2 millennia. Shakespeare immortalized her in Antony and Cleopatra. Hollywood portrayed her as the ultimate femme fatale, but the historical Cleopatra was far more complex than these stereotypes suggest. She was a skilled ruler who maintained Egypt's independence for over 2 decades in an increasingly Roman-dominated world. She was an intellectual who could debate with philosophers, and a polyglot who could address her subjects in their own languages. Her reign marked both an ending and a beginning. She was the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last active pharaoh of Egypt, and the last ruler of a Hellenistic kingdom. But she was also one of the first rulers to understand the power of personal charisma and carefully crafted image in international politics. Her methods of combining cultural sensitivity with pragmatic politics, personal charm with state power, would influence rulers for generations to come. Modern scholarship has begun to look beyond the Roman propaganda that shaped her historical image, recognizing her as a capable ruler who navigated treacherous political waters with remarkable skill. Her death marked the end of both Ptolemaic and Pharaonic Egypt, but her legacy as ruler, scholar, and strategist continues to captivate and inspire. In the end, Cleopatra achieved what she sought most: immortality not through conquest, but through the enduring power of her example as a woman who dared to challenge the greatest empire of her age. In the golden age of the Roman Empire, when peace and prosperity stretched from Britain to Egypt, a ruler emerged who would be remembered not for his conquests, but for his wisdom. Born in the year 121 of our era, Marcus Aurelius would become the embodiment of Plato's ideal, the philosopher king, whose reign would mark both the height of Roman power and the beginning of its transformation. The Rome of Marcus's youth was at its zenith, enjoying the prosperity and stability established by the 5 good emperors. The empire had reached its greatest extent. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean, and the Pax Romana enabled unprecedented cultural exchange. Into this world of privilege and power, young Marcus brought an unexpected quality: a philosophical mind that questioned the very nature of power and success. Unlike many noble Roman youths who pursued pleasure and ambition, Marcus showed an early inclination toward simplicity and contemplation. His family's wealth could have provided every luxury, but he chose to sleep on a simple hard floor, wear plain clothing, and devote himself to study. He would later write, "From my grandfather Verus, I learned good morals and the government of my temper." His education was extraordinary even by the standards of Roman nobility. The finest teachers in the empire guided his studies: Herod's Atticus in rhetoric, Marcus Cornelius Fronto in Latin, and most importantly, Junius Rusticus in Stoic philosophy. These men shaped not just his learning, but his character. He would later write with gratitude about each of them in his Meditations, acknowledging how they helped form his worldview. When Emperor Hadrian, nearing death, chose Antoninus Pius as his successor, he did so on the condition that Antoninus adopt both Marcus and Lucius Verus as his heirs. This decision would create the first co-emperorship in Roman history. Marcus's preparation for rule was thorough. He learned law, administration, and military science, all while deepening his philosophical studies. Upon becoming emperor in the year 161, Marcus faced immediate challenges. The Parthians invaded Roman territories in the east, while Germanic tribes threatened the northern frontiers. A devastating plague, brought back by returning soldiers, swept through the empire, killing millions. Yet in these crises, Marcus's philosophical training proved invaluable. His Meditations, written during campaign nights on the northern frontiers, reveal a mind struggling to maintain wisdom and composure amid chaos. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. Yet rather than becoming cynical, he counseled understanding and patience. The Marcomannic Wars, which consumed much of his reign, tested both his military leadership and philosophical principles. The Germanic tribes, pressed by peoples moving westward from Central Asia, began crossing the Danube in unprecedented numbers. Marcus responded with both force and diplomacy. He strengthened the frontiers, reorganized the armies, and innovated by settling defeated tribes within Roman territories as farmer soldiers. Despite the demands of war, Marcus never neglected the empire's internal administration. He reformed the law to protect the weak, extending legal rights to women and slaves. He established chairs of philosophy in Athens, making it the intellectual capital of the empire. During the plague, he organized public health measures and provided state funds for mass burials, showing practical compassion in crisis. His personal life was marked by both devotion and tragedy. His wife Faustina, whom he deeply loved, accompanied him on campaigns until her death. Of their 13 children, only 5 survived to adulthood. Yet in his writings, he found meaning even in loss. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. The question of succession troubled his final years. His son Commodus showed none of his father's philosophical inclination or sense of duty. Yet Marcus, perhaps hoping that responsibility would mature the youth, made him co-emperor. It was a decision that would have grave consequences for Rome. When Marcus died in the year 180, on campaign along the Danube, the empire lost more than an emperor. His death marked the end of the Pax Romana and the beginning of a long decline. Yet his greatest legacy was not his rule but his thoughts, preserved in the Meditations. This remarkable work, never intended for publication, reveals the inner life of a ruler struggling to live by his principles. His insights remain startlingly relevant. The universe's change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Unlike other philosophical works that speak in abstractions, the Meditations show a mind wrestling with practical challenges. Maintaining composure in crisis, treating others with justice, accepting what cannot be changed while working to improve what can. His thoughts on leadership remain particularly relevant. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Marcus Aurelius's reign represented a unique moment in history, when the most powerful man in the world was also one of its wisest philosophers. He demonstrated that power and wisdom need not conflict, that one could be both strong and gentle, both practical and philosophical. Perhaps his most enduring lesson was about finding peace amid chaos. In an age of pandemic, war, and social upheaval, his words still resonate. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. The world he knew would soon change dramatically. The Roman Empire would face increasing pressures, eventually transforming into something very different. Yet Marcus's example of maintaining ethical principles while wielding great power, of seeking wisdom while facing practical challenges, remains deeply relevant. His legacy lives on not just in his writings, but in the very idea that leadership should be guided by wisdom and ethical principles. In a world still struggling with questions of power and morality, the philosopher-emperor continues to teach us about finding balance between duty and contemplation, between accepting what we cannot change and working to improve what we can. In the golden age of ancient Israel, when the kingdom reached its greatest glory, there ruled a king whose wisdom would become legendary throughout the ages. Born in the year 990 before the Common Era, Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, would transform a warrior kingdom into a center of wisdom, wealth, and architectural splendor that would inspire wonder for millennia to come. The Israel of Solomon's youth was a kingdom newly unified under his father David's banner, after centuries of tribal division and foreign domination. David had created a powerful realm stretching from the Euphrates to the borders of Egypt. Yet this achievement was shadowed by personal drama. Solomon's very existence stemmed from his father's controversial relationship with Bathsheba, a union born in tragedy and repentance. Solomon's path to the throne was not assured, though David had promised Bathsheba her son would rule. Solomon's older brother Adonijah attempted to seize power as their father lay dying. It took the swift action of the prophet Nathan, together with Bathsheba's intervention, to secure Solomon's succession. In a ceremony beside the sacred spring of Gihon, the young prince was anointed king, while the sounds of rejoicing echoed through Jerusalem's valleys. Early in his reign, at the holy place of Gihon, Solomon experienced a divine encounter that would define his rule. In a dream, God offered him anything he desired. Instead of requesting long life, riches, or victory over his enemies, the young king asked for wisdom to govern his people justly. This humble request pleased God so much that Solomon was granted not only unparalleled wisdom, but also wealth and honor beyond measure. The famous judgment of Solomon soon demonstrated this divine gift. When two women claimed the same infant as their own, Solomon's seemingly cruel suggestion to cut the baby in half revealed the true mother through her willingness to give up her child rather than see it harmed. This display of psychological insight and justice spread his reputation far beyond Israel's borders. Solomon's greatest achievement was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, a project that took 7 years and thousands of workers to complete. The temple's dimensions and details were planned with extraordinary precision. Cedar logs were floated down from Lebanon's forests, while Phoenician craftsmen worked alongside Israelite laborers. The finished sanctuary gleamed with gold, its walls adorned with carved cherubim, palm trees, and flowers. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant rested, was overlaid with pure gold, as were the 2 massive cherubim that spread their wings above it. Under Solomon's rule, Jerusalem was transformed. He built a royal palace that took 13 years to complete, even longer than the temple. The structure included the House of the Forest of Lebanon, named for its cedar pillars, and the Hall of Justice, where he would deliver his famous judgments. The city's defenses were strengthened with new walls and towers, while water systems were developed to sustain the growing population. Solomon's administrative genius matched his architectural ambitions. He divided the kingdom into 12 districts, each responsible for supplying the royal court for 1 month of the year. he developed trade relations with distant lands. His ships sailed to Tarshish and Ophir, returning with gold, silver, ivory, and exotic animals. His commercial treaties with Hiram of Tyre and other rulers brought unprecedented wealth to Israel. The visit of the Queen of Sheba became legendary. Arriving with a great caravan of spices, gold, and precious stones, she came to test Solomon's wisdom with hard questions. After experiencing his insights and seeing his achievements, she declared that not even half of his wisdom and prosperity had been told to her. Their meeting represented a high point of international diplomacy and cultural exchange in the ancient world. Solomon's intellectual achievements were as impressive as his material accomplishments. He is traditionally credited with writing 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. The Book of Proverbs preserves many of his wisdom sayings, while the Song of Songs captures the height of Hebrew poetry. The Book of Ecclesiastes, with its philosophical reflections on life's meaning, is also attributed to him. Yet Solomon's later years saw decline. His marriage to Pharaoh's daughter had begun a pattern of diplomatic marriages that eventually led to a royal harem of 700 wives and 300 concubines. Many of these women brought their own religious practices, and Solomon built shrines to accommodate their worship. This religious tolerance, while perhaps politically expedient, represented a departure from strict Israelite monotheism. The maintenance of Solomon's court required immense resources. Each day's provisions included 30 measures of fine flour, 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. This abundance came at a cost. Taxes and forced labor requirements bred resentment, particularly in the northern tribes. When Solomon died in the year 931 before the Common Era, after 40 years of rule, he left a kingdom at its peak of cultural achievement, but showing signs of strain. His son Rehoboam's harsh response to requests for lighter burdens led to the kingdom's division, fulfilling prophecies made during Solomon's lifetime. Yet Solomon's legacy transcended these political developments. His wisdom became proverbial to be as wise as Solomon, remained the highest compliment one could pay to a ruler's judgment. The temple he built, though eventually destroyed, established a model of sacred space that would influence religious architecture for millennia. His proverbs and writings continued to offer insight into human nature and divine truth. Perhaps most importantly, Solomon's reign represented an ideal of what leadership could be: wise, prosperous, and peace-seeking, though he failed to maintain this ideal perfectly. His example of choosing wisdom above all other gifts continues to inspire. In a world of conflict and confusion, Solomon's prayer for an understanding heart to judge your people, to distinguish between good and evil, remains remarkably relevant. The complexities of Solomon's character, his wisdom and his follies, his achievements and his excesses, make him more than a simple moral exemplar. He stands as a fully human figure whose greatness and weaknesses remind us that wisdom, while invaluable, must be consistently applied and carefully guarded. His story suggests that true wisdom involves not just knowledge or judgment, but the continuous effort to live according to one's highest understanding. In the dawn of the 16th century, when England stood at the crossroads between medieval tradition and Renaissance innovation, a prince was born who would transform his kingdom more profoundly than any ruler before him. Henry VIII, who ascended to the throne in the year 1509, would break with Rome, establish a new church, marry 6 times, and forever change the nature of English monarchy and society. The England of Henry's youth was a realm emerging from the shadows of civil war. His father, Henry VII, had secured the throne through victory at Bosworth Field and marriage to Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York. Young Henry, as the second son, was initially destined for the church, receiving an exceptional education in theology, languages, music, and the classics under the finest Renaissance scholars. When his older brother Arthur died in the year 1502, 16-year-old Henry became heir to the throne. His father, determined to maintain the Spanish alliance, arranged for Henry to marry Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon. A papal dispensation was secured, setting the stage for a marriage that would later spark a religious revolution. The young king, who took the throne in the year 1509, seemed to embody the Renaissance ideal. Tall, athletic, and accomplished, Henry excelled in jousting, archery, and tennis. He spoke multiple languages, composed music, and wrote theological treatises. Foreign ambassadors marveled at his learning and charm. The Venetian ambassador wrote, "His Majesty is the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on. Above the usual height, with an extremely fine calf to his leg, his complexion very fair and bright." His early reign promised greatness. Surrounded by brilliant advisors like Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry pursued an ambitious foreign policy. He fought wars against France, formed alliances with major European powers, and positioned England as a significant player in continental politics. The Field of the Cloth of Gold in the year 1520, where he met with French King Francis I, showcased English wealth and Henry's personal magnificence. Yet beneath the glittering surface, a growing crisis threatened. Despite 20 years of marriage, Catherine had produced only one surviving child, a daughter Mary. For a Renaissance monarch obsessed with securing his dynasty, the lack of a male heir was more than a personal disappointment. It was a potential catastrophe. Henry became convinced that his marriage to his brother's widow had been cursed by God. The arrival of Anne Boleyn at court changed everything. Intelligent, educated, and reform-minded, Anne refused to become merely another royal mistress. Her influence, combined with Henry's desperate desire for a son, led to the momentous break with Rome. When Pope Clement VII, constrained by political pressure from Catherine's nephew Emperor Charles V, refused to annul Henry's marriage, the king took dramatic action. The English Reformation was born not from profound theological conviction, but from royal necessity. Between the years 1532 and 1534, Parliament passed a series of acts that separated the English Church from Rome and made the king its supreme head. Thomas Cromwell, who replaced the fallen Wolsey as chief minister, engineered this legal revolution with remarkable skill. The dissolution of the monasteries that followed transformed English society. Over 800 religious houses were closed, their vast wealth and lands transferred to the crown. This massive redistribution of property created a new class of landed gentry loyal to the throne, while simultaneously destroying the institutional basis of Catholic power in England. Henry's marital history became increasingly turbulent. Anne Boleyn, who had promised a son, bore another daughter, the future Elizabeth I. When she failed to produce a male heir, Henry had her executed on charges of treason and incest. Jane Seymour, his third wife, finally gave him his longed-for son, but died shortly after childbirth. Anne of Cleves, chosen from a Holbein portrait, proved disappointing in person and was quickly divorced. Catherine Howard, young and flirtatious, met the same fate as her cousin Anne Boleyn. Only Catherine Parr, his last wife, survived him. As Henry aged, the handsome Renaissance prince transformed into something darker. A jousting accident in the year 1536 left him with a chronic leg wound that never healed properly. His weight increased dramatically, and his temper became more volatile. The king who had once charmed Europe became a figure of fear, executing nobles and commoners alike on the slightest suspicion. Yet even in his later years, Henry remained an effective ruler. He modernized the navy, building the first real English fleet and establishing the naval dockyards that would later help defeat the Spanish Armada. He reformed government administration, expanded the role of Parliament, and strengthened royal authority throughout the realm. His cultural impact was equally significant. The translation of the Bible into English, though intended primarily to support his religious policies, helped standardize the English language. His court was a center of Renaissance learning and artistic innovation, where humanist scholars like Thomas More before his execution, and artists like Hans Holbein the Younger found patronage. When Henry died in the year 1547, he left a transformed kingdom. The medieval Catholic realm he had inherited had become a sovereign Protestant state with the monarch as supreme religious and political authority. Though his son Edward VI would die young, and his daughter Mary would temporarily restore Catholicism, the changes Henry initiated proved permanent under Elizabeth I. His legacy extends far beyond the religious changes he initiated. The modern English state, with its strong central authority, professional bureaucracy, and established church, owes much to his reign. The precedent of using Parliament to effect revolutionary change would influence English political development for centuries. Perhaps most significantly, Henry VIII established a new concept of English sovereignty. His famous declaration that England is an empire, governed by one supreme head and king, established the principle of national independence that would shape British history. The Royal Navy he created would become the instrument of later British global power. Today, Henry VIII remains one of history's most recognizable monarchs. His image fixed in popular imagination through Holbein's famous portrait legs planted wide, hands on hips, the very embodiment of royal authority. His 6 marriages have become legendary. His break with Rome a pivotal moment in European history. Yet his true legacy lies deeper. In the foundations he laid for modern England, in the precedents he set for royal authority, and in the profound changes he wrought in English society and culture. The transformation he initiated, from medieval kingdom to modern nation-state, from Catholic realm to Protestant power, from peripheral island to emerging empire, would shape not just English but world history. In the end, Henry VIII's reign demonstrates how personal desires and political necessity can combine to produce revolutionary change, and how one ruler's actions can alter the course of history in ways that endure for centuries. In the tumultuous years following Julius Caesar's assassination, when Rome teetered between republic and chaos, an unlikely figure emerged who would transform the ancient world. Born Gaius Octavius in the 63rd year before the Common Era, he would become Augustus, Rome's first emperor and the architect of a system of government that would endure for centuries. The Rome of Octavian's youth was a city torn by decades of civil war. The old republican system, designed for governing a city-state, strained under the weight of controlling a vast Mediterranean empire. Political violence had become commonplace, with rival generals marching armies on the capital and aristocratic families wielding private armies. It was in this volatile environment that young Octavian received news that would change his life. His great uncle Julius Caesar had named him as his primary heir. When Caesar fell to assassins' daggers on the Ides of March, Octavian was just 18, studying in Apollonia. Many counseled caution, but he immediately set sail for Italy to claim his inheritance. Mark Antony, Caesar's former lieutenant, dismissed him as a boy. But Octavian quickly proved his political acumen. He borrowed money to pay Caesar's bequests to the Roman people, winning popular support, and began gathering veterans to his cause. His early alliance with the Senate against Antony showed his tactical flexibility. When the Senate tried to discard him after using his forces, he shocked them by marching on Rome and forcing his election as consul. At age 19, the formation of the Second Triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus revealed his pragmatism. He would work with enemies when necessary, but never forget their earlier opposition. The hunt for Caesar's assassins culminated in the Battle of Philippi, where Brutus and Cassius met their end. Though Antony led the actual fighting, Octavian, despite being ill during the battle, ensured he received equal credit. He began building his image as a military leader while cleverly letting others do the actual fighting, a pattern that would continue throughout his life. His systematic removal of rivals showed ruthless efficiency, combined with political wisdom. Lepidus was marginalized and eventually stripped of power, but allowed to live, an example of Octavian's preference for bloodless victories where possible. The conflict with Antony and Cleopatra was masterfully handled through propaganda that painted it as a foreign war against Egypt rather than civil conflict, culminating in the decisive Battle of Actium in 31 before the Common Era. After securing power, Octavian's genius lay in his transformation of the Roman state. In a carefully choreographed series of moves, he restored power to the Senate and people while retaining actual control. Taking the name Augustus in 27 before the Common Era, he created the illusion of the restored republic while establishing what historians would later call the Principate rule by the first citizen. His administrative reforms were comprehensive. He created the Praetorian Guard, professionally organized fire brigades, and a sophisticated postal service. He established a permanent standing army with fixed terms of service and retirement benefits, ending the threat of generals raising private armies. The empire was divided into imperial and senatorial provinces, with Augustus directly controlling those with significant military forces. Augustus's building program literally transformed Rome. Beyond his famous boast about marble and brick, he created a sophisticated urban planning system, including fire districts and height restrictions on buildings. The Campus Martius was developed into a grand public space with the Ara Pacis, Altar of Peace, the Horologium, a giant sundial, and his own mausoleum. The Forum of Augustus set a new standard for imperial architecture. His cultural program was equally ambitious. He supported poets like Virgil, whose Aeneid provided Rome with a national epic linking Augustus to the city's mythical founders. Horace and Ovid created works that would define Latin literature. He encouraged a revival of traditional Roman religious and moral values, passing laws on marriage and adultery. Though his own family would often fail to live up to these standards, his relationship with Livia Drusilla, his third wife, was a crucial element of his success. Their marriage lasted 51 years, and she served as a model of Roman womanhood while being one of his most important political advisors. Together, they created an image of the perfect Roman family. Though the reality, with exiles and scandals among their children and grandchildren, was far more complex. The Pax Romana, Roman peace, that Augustus established brought unprecedented prosperity. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean, now free from pirates. Roads connected the empire's furthest reaches, and a sophisticated postal system facilitated communication. Cities throughout the empire adopted Roman customs and architecture, beginning the process of Romanization that would transform the ancient world. His solution to the problem of succession was less successful. Despite elaborate preparations, the death of his intended heirs forced him to settle on his stepson Tiberius, establishing the principle of adoptive succession that would serve Rome well in the following century. When he died in 14 of the Common Era, at age 75, the Roman world mourned its first and perhaps greatest emperor. Augustus's legacy was immense. He created a system of government that would endure for centuries, balancing the practical need for central authority with republican traditions. His title became synonymous with imperial rule. Every Roman emperor until the end of the empire would call himself Augustus. The month of August, renamed in his honor, carries his memory to the present day. His methods of rule, the careful balance of power and appearance, the use of propaganda and public works, the combination of traditional values with practical reforms would influence rulers for centuries to come. The Res Gesti, his political testament, inscribed on bronze tablets, provides a model of how rulers should present their achievements to posterity. Perhaps Augustus's greatest achievement was creating stability after decades of civil war. His famous motto, Festina Lent, make haste slowly, captured his approach to governance, careful, methodical, but ultimately transformative. He understood that lasting change requires not just military victory, but cultural and institutional transformation. The Rome that Augustus created would dominate the Mediterranean world for centuries. His vision of empire combining military power with cultural sophistication, central authority with local autonomy, innovation with tradition, shaped not just Roman history, but the development of Western civilization. In many ways, we still live in the world that Augustus built. In the turbulent aftermath of the French Revolution, when old orders crumbled and new dreams seemed possible, a young officer from Corsica rose to become one of history's most remarkable figures. Napoleon Bonaparte, born on the 15th of August, 1769, would transform not just France, but the entire European continent, leaving a legacy that continues to influence our world today. The Corsica of Napoleon's youth was a recently acquired French territory, still proud of its independence and distinct culture. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, had initially resisted French rule before pragmatically accepting it, a lesson in political adaptability that young Napoleon would never forget. Though of noble birth, the family's poverty meant that Napoleon's education at France's elite military academies came through royal sponsorship, creating a chip on his shoulder that would fuel his ambition. At the Royal Military School in Paris, Napoleon's outsider status, his accent marked him as foreign, his poverty as inferior, drove him to excel. He devoured books on military strategy, particularly admiring Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. His mathematical genius made him a brilliant artillery officer, understanding trajectories and positions in ways that would later revolutionize warfare. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Napoleon, then a young artillery officer, saw opportunity in chaos. While other officers fled France, He remained, carefully navigating the political turbulence. His moment came at the Siege of Toulon in 1793, where his innovative use of artillery to capture key positions caught the attention of the revolutionary government. At 24, he became the youngest general in French history. His Italian campaign of 1796 revealed his military genius to the world. With an under-equipped army of 30,000 men, he defeated larger Austrian forces through a combination of rapid movement, concentrated force, and brilliant psychological warfare. He told his troops, "You are poorly fed and half-naked. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. There you will find honor, glory, and riches." The Egyptian campaign, while militarily unsuccessful, showcased another side of Napoleon. He brought with him not just soldiers, but scientists, artists, and scholars. Their work, including the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, helped birth the field of Egyptology. Even in conquest, Napoleon understood the importance of cultural and scientific achievement. His rise to power in 1799 came through a carefully orchestrated coup, transformed by his propaganda into a popular revolution. As first consul and later emperor, he proved himself as brilliant an administrator as he was a general. The Napoleonic Code, which he personally helped draft, revolutionized French law, abolishing feudal privileges and establishing clear civil rights. This code would eventually influence legal systems across Europe and the Americas. Napoleon's domestic reforms were sweeping. He established the Bank of France, stabilizing the currency after years of revolutionary chaos. He reformed education, creating lycées and technical schools that would produce the administrators and engineers his modern state needed. He built roads, bridges, and canals, modernizing France's infrastructure. The Legion of Honor, which he created, remains France's highest decoration. His marriage to Joséphine de Beauharnais, a widow 6 years his senior, revealed his romantic side. Their letters show passionate love, though also his growing obsession with having an heir, which eventually led him to divorce her. His second marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria produced the desired son, but lacked the passion of his first marriage. The height of his power came after the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, perhaps his greatest military masterpiece. Against superior Austrian and Russian forces, he used the terrain and weather to create a tactical situation that has been studied by military commanders ever since. The victory led to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and established French dominance in Europe. His continental system, designed to strangle British trade, revealed both his strategic vision and its limitations. While innovative, it ultimately hurt French allies more than Britain and contributed to his downfall. Similarly, his decision to invade Russia in 1812, while following a certain strategic logic, failed to account for the Russians' willingness to sacrifice Moscow itself to defeat him. The Russian campaign marked the beginning of the end. Of the 600,000 men who marched east, fewer than 100,000 returned. Yet even in defeat, Napoleon showed his military genius, winning battles against overwhelming odds during the campaign of 1814. His farewell to his old guard at Fontainebleau remains one of history's most moving moments. His 100-day return from Elba in 1815 demonstrated his extraordinary charisma. Units sent to arrest him instead joined him, and he retook power without firing a shot. But the Battle of Waterloo ended his dreams of empire forever. His final years on St. Helena were spent dictating his memoirs, carefully crafting his legacy for posterity. Napoleon's influence extended far beyond military matters. He sponsored the arts and sciences, reformed education, and modernized administration across Europe. The metric system, which he spread across his conquered territories, is now used worldwide. His standardization of law and administration helped create the modern bureaucratic state. His architectural legacy can still be seen in Paris, from the Arc de Triomphe to the Rue de Rivoli. He understood the importance of symbols and spectacle in governance, creating ceremonies and institutions that linked his regime to both the Roman Empire and the French monarchy, while emphasizing its revolutionary origins. Yet Napoleon's legacy is deeply ambiguous. He spread the ideals of the French Revolution: legal equality, religious tolerance, merit-based advancement across Europe, but did so through conquest. He modernized administration and law wherever he ruled, but his wars caused millions of deaths. He promoted education and science, but also censorship and political repression. When he died on St. Helena in 1821, reportedly whispering, "France, Armée Joséphine." He had shaped the modern world in ways that continue to resonate. His nephew Napoleon III would later build an empire inspired by his uncle's example. Leaders from Simon Bolivar to Charles de Gaulle would study his methods and achievements. Perhaps Napoleon's greatest legacy is the demonstration of how a single individual's vision and will can reshape the world. As he said, impossible is a word only found in the dictionary of fools. His life showed both the possibilities and the limitations of human ambition, the grandeur of dreams and the price of their pursuit. Today, while the empires he built and fought have vanished, his influence persists in law codes, educational systems, military doctrine, and political institutions across the world. His name remains synonymous with both military genius and overwhelming ambition, a reminder that the power to change history often comes at a tremendous cost. Charlemagne in the twilight of the 8th century, when Europe lay fragmented in the shadows of Rome's fallen glory. A ruler arose who would forge a new empire from the ashes of the old. Born in the year 747 in the region of Aachen, Charles, son of Pepin the Short, would become known to history as Charlemagne Charles the Great, the king who united Western Europe and laid the foundations for medieval civilization. The Europe of Charlemagne's youth was a world in transition. The Roman roads were crumbling, Cities had shrunk to fortified villages, and knowledge of classical learning was preserved mainly in remote monasteries. The Frankish kingdom, though powerful, was surrounded by hostile peoples. Muslims in Spain, pagans in the north, and Lombards in Italy. Yet within this challenging landscape, the Carolingian dynasty had emerged as defenders of both Christianity and Roman tradition. Charlemagne's education reflected this dual heritage, though later legends would paint him as illiterate until adulthood. He likely received training in both martial arts and basic letters from an early age. His father's court maintained strong ties with the church, and young Charles grew up understanding the vital partnership between secular and religious power that would define his reign. When Pepin died in 768, his kingdom was divided between his sons, Charles and Carloman. The relationship between the brothers was tense, marked by rivalry and mutual suspicion. Only Carloman's unexpected death in 771 prevented civil war and left Charles as sole ruler of the Franks. Some whispered of foul play, but Charles quickly secured the loyalty of his brother's followers and began to implement his vision of a united Christian kingdom. His first major campaign targeted the Lombards in Italy. When Pope Adrian I called for help against Lombard aggression, Charles responded with characteristic decisiveness. In 774, he led his army across the Alps, conquered Pavia, and took the title King of the Lombards. This intervention established a pattern that would define his reign: military conquest followed by Christian conversion and administrative integration. The Saxon Wars, lasting 33 years, represented his longest and most brutal campaign. The Saxons, fierce Germanic tribes who maintained their pagan beliefs, repeatedly rose in rebellion against Frankish rule and Christian missionaries. Charles responded with increasing harshness, culminating in the infamous massacre of Verdun in 782, where reportedly 4,500 Saxon nobles were executed in a single day. This act, though brutal, demonstrated his determination to create a unified Christian kingdom at any cost. Yet Charlemagne was far more than a conqueror. His court at Aachen became the center of what historians would later call the Carolingian Renaissance. He gathered scholars from across Europe, including Alcuin of York, Paul the Deacon, and Einhard, who would later write his biography. These learned men helped establish a standardized curriculum based on the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. His educational reforms were revolutionary. He established schools in monasteries and cathedrals, insisting that education be available not just to clergy, but to all capable students regardless of social status. He ordered the standardization of religious texts and liturgical practices, helping to preserve classical knowledge and establish Latin as the common language of learning across Europe. The Carolingian minuscule, a new form of writing developed under his patronage, made texts more legible and copying more efficient. This script would eventually evolve into the lowercase letters we use today. His scribes preserved countless classical texts that might otherwise have been lost, earning him the title Father of Europe, not just for his conquests, but for his role in preserving classical culture. His administrative reforms were equally impressive. He divided his empire into counties, each governed by a count responsible for maintaining justice, collecting taxes, and raising troops. To prevent these counts from becoming too independent, he sent out special envoys called missi dominici, the Lord's messengers, to inspect local administration and ensure royal authority was maintained. Charlemagne's monetary reforms introduced a new silver standard and a standardized system of weights and measures across his empire. He improved infrastructure, rebuilding Roman roads and bridges, and established a system of frontier regions called marks to protect his borders. His capitularies, written laws, and administrative orders provided detailed guidance on everything from judicial procedures to monastery management. His personal life was as complex as his public achievements, though he had multiple wives and concubines, bearing him at least 18 children. He was deeply involved in his children's education and maintained strong family bonds. His court at Aachen featured thermal baths modeled on Roman examples, and he was known for his love of swimming and hunting. According to Einhard, he was tall, robust, and maintained a simple lifestyle despite his immense power. The climax of his reign came on Christmas Day in the year 800, when Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the Romans in St. Peter's Basilica. This coronation legitimized his rule over former Roman territories and established the concept of the Holy Roman Empire that would shape European politics for centuries. Yet it also marked a crucial shift in the relationship between secular and religious power, as the Pope claimed the authority to grant imperial legitimacy. His empire reached its greatest extent around 814, stretching from the Atlantic to the Elbe River, from the North Sea to central Italy. It encompassed numerous peoples and cultures, united under a common administrative system and Christian faith, though this unity would not survive his death. The empire was divided among his grandsons through the Treaty of Verdun in 843. His reign established patterns of governance, culture, and religion that would define medieval Europe. Charlemagne died on January 28, 814, after ruling for 46 years. According to legend, he was buried seated on a throne, crowned and dressed in imperial regalia, holding the Gospels in his lap. When his tomb was opened centuries later by Otto III, he was indeed found seated on a marble throne, though time had reduced his mortal remains to dust. His legacy lived on not just in political institutions, but in literature and legend. The Song of Roland transformed his Spanish campaign into an epic of Christian heroism. His reign became a golden age in medieval memory, and later rulers from Otto the Great to Napoleon sought to claim his legacy. The French called him Charlemagne, the Germans Karl der Grosse, but both traditions looked back to him as the founder of their national identities. Today, Charlemagne's vision of European unity continues to resonate. The Charlemagne Prize, awarded by the city of Aachen for contributions to European unity, bears his name. His capital at Aachen stands at the intersection of modern France, Germany, and the Benelux countries, a symbol of European integration. Though his empire fragmented after his death, his greater achievement, the creation of a common European civilization based on Christian values, Roman law, and classical learning, endured. In the end, Charlemagne's greatest legacy was not just the territory he conquered, but the civilization he fostered. A unique fusion of Roman tradition, Christian faith, and Germanic vigor that would evolve into medieval European culture. His reign marked the true beginning of the Middle Ages and laid the groundwork for the emergence of modern Europe.